Welcome to Learn English Through History. Take a slow, deep breath, relax your shoulders, and listen carefully to the English words. In southern Germany, there is a quiet town called Herzogenaurach. The Aurach River flows right through the middle of the valley. On both sides of the water, stone streets wind between old wooden houses. From the outside, it looks like any peaceful village where neighbors share morning greetings. But if you walk down these streets, you will notice something very unusual. When two people meet on the sidewalk, they do not look into each other's eyes first. Their gaze drops straight to the ground. They look at your shoes. They want to see the brand on your feet before they decide to speak with you, sell you a loaf of bread, or welcome you into their shop. For decades, people across Germany called this place the town of bent necks. People bent their heads down to examine footwear. In this town, the shoes on your feet told everyone exactly who you were. If your sneakers carried 3 white stripes stitched along the leather, you belonged to the southern side of the river. If your sneakers featured a leaping wildcat, you belonged to the northern side. A sneaker is a soft sports shoe with a rubber sole made for athletics and everyday walking. Those two famous designs belong to two of the largest sports companies in modern history, Adidas and Puma. Today, millions of athletes, musicians, and everyday people wear these two brands across the globe. We see their logos in international stadiums, on television, and in city streets everywhere. Yet very few people know that these two giant empires were born in the same small German town, inside the very same family home. Even fewer people realize that Adidas and Puma were founded by two brothers who spent their childhood sleeping in the exact same bedroom. Their names were Adolf Dassler and Rudolf Dassler. Adolf was the younger brother, and everyone called him Adi. Rudolf was the older brother, known to his friends as Rudy. They started from nothing after the First World War. They had no modern factory, no money, and no special machinery. They began inside their mother's damp laundry room, using discarded army helmets and scrap leather to stitch their very first running shoes. Adi was the quiet craftsman. A craftsman is a skilled worker who creates objects by hand with great care and patience. Adi understood how leather bent around a runner's foot. Rudy was the energetic salesman. A salesman is a person whose job is to talk to customers and convince them to buy goods. Rudy knew how to charm store owners and negotiate big orders. Together, their different talents created an unstoppable business. They made lightweight shoes that won Olympic gold medals and gained international fame. But great success soon brought deep suspicion, jealousy, and bitter arguments. A painful family feud tore the brothers apart. A feud is a long, angry conflict between family members or groups that lasts for many years. Their anger divided their family, split their workers, and cut their entire hometown in two. They built rival factories on opposite riverbanks and never spoke another friendly word to each other for the rest of their lives. Here is the story of how a brotherly partnership became the most famous rivalry in business history. In the year 1919, the world was slowly recovering from the First World War. Germany was poor, hungry, and exhausted. Millions of young soldiers returned to broken towns with no jobs. Adolf Dassler came home to his small Bavarian hometown of Herzogenaurach at just 20 years old. Most young men around him looked for safe, traditional work, making wooden furniture or heavy work boots. But Adi had a different passion. A passion is a very strong feeling of enthusiasm or love for a specific activity. Adi loved sports. He loved sprinting on dirt tracks, jumping over wooden hurdles, and playing soccer with his friends. Adi noticed something important about athletes. Runners and soccer players wore heavy, uncomfortable shoes. These shoes were not built for speed. They absorbed water in the rain and became heavy like bricks. Adi wanted to create a light, flexible shoe designed only for sports. But he had no money to buy fresh leather or rent a proper workshop. So he turned to his mother, Pauline. Pauline operated a small laundry service in the back of the family home. Her wash kitchen was tiny, measuring only about 200 square feet. The room was damp, smelling of hot water and soap. Adi cleaned a small corner, set up a wooden table, and went to work. Because raw materials were extremely scarce, Adi had to scavenge. To scavenge means to search through discarded waste and collect useful items. He walked through the countryside searching for abandoned military equipment. He collected old army helmets, heavy canvas backpacks, and cut-up tire rubber. With these scraps, Adi began cutting patterns by hand. He used strong canvas from army bags for the shoe bodies and durable rubber from tires for the soles. A sole is the bottom surface of a shoe that touches the ground. Herzogenaurach had an unreliable power supply during those difficult post-war years, and the electricity often shut down without warning. Adi refused to stop working. He took an old stationary bicycle, mounted a leather belt to the wheel, and connected it to his grinding stone. Whenever the lights went out, a friend or family member sat on the bicycle and pedaled hard. This pedaling spun the stone so Adi could shape the leather and smooth the rubber edges. Adi worked day and night in that dim washroom, testing every pair himself. He knew every single stitch mattered. By 1923, Adi's handmade athletic shoes were gaining a loyal following among local Bavarian athletes. But Adi was overwhelmed. He loved designing and sewing, but he hated doing business paperwork, keeping accounting books, and selling products to strangers. That was when his older brother Rudolf decided to join the project. Rudolf was 2 years older than Adi. He was bold, friendly, confident, and full of restless ambition. Ambition is a strong desire to achieve great success, power, or wealth. Rudolf immediately recognized the tremendous potential in Adi's unique sports shoes. Together, the two brothers prepared to turn their mother's humble wash kitchen into an official footwear company. In 1924, the two brothers took their first historic step together. On July 1st, they officially registered their new business under the name Gebruder Dassler Sportschuhfabrik. In English, this name meant the Dassler Brothers Sports Shoe Factory. They moved their tools out of their mother's laundry room and set up a proper workshop near the local train station. The brothers had very little money, but they shared an immense drive to revolutionize athletic footwear. From the very beginning, their partnership worked because of their opposite personalities. Adolf was the quiet craftsman. A craftsman is a skilled worker who makes things carefully by hand. Adi spent endless hours bent over his wooden table, analyzing the human foot. He studied how athletes ran, jumped, and landed on dirt tracks. He realized that a soccer player needed support on grass, while a track runner needed lightness and traction on gravel. Traction is the grip that stops a shoe from slipping on a surface. Adi experimented with different animal leathers, thin wood soles, and hand-forged metal spikes. He never spoke much, but his hands knew how to shape raw leather into pure speed. Rudolf, on the other hand, was born to sell. He dressed sharply, spoke with confidence, and easily made friends wherever he traveled. A salesman is a person whose job is to persuade people to buy company goods. Rudi packed heavy leather suitcases full of Adi's latest shoe samples and boarded trains across Germany. He visited local sports clubs, met with regional running coaches, and showed them the exceptional quality of Dassler shoes. Rudi did not just sell shoes, he sold enthusiasm and modern athletic performance. Whenever a coach hesitated, Rudi offered a free trial pair, knowing the athlete would fall in love with the grip. Orders soon started pouring into the small town of Herzogenaurach. The brothers hired more local cobblers and seamstresses to keep up with the rising demand. A seamstress is a woman whose job is sewing clothes or leather goods. The factory floor was filled with the rhythmic sound of cutting knives, pounding hammers, and the pungent smell of fresh glue. By 1928, Dassler track shoes appeared at the Amsterdam Olympic Games, where German runners claimed their first international medals in Dassler spiked shoes. As the company grew throughout the early 1930s, the Dassler brothers proved that their combined skills were unbeatable. Adi created masterpieces of engineering at the workbench, and Rudi turned those inventions into profitable contracts. Yet, beneath their commercial triumph, their personal differences were quietly deepening. Adi loved the quiet laboratory of his workshop, while Rudi loved public recognition, power, and high society. For now, their shared vision kept them united. The world of international sports was expanding rapidly, and an extraordinary moment was approaching. In 1936, the greatest athletes on earth were preparing to gather in Berlin, and Adi had a daring plan that would either make the Dassler brothers world famous or ruin everything they had built. Adi Dassler knew that the Olympic Games in Berlin were a rare opportunity. Athletes from all around the world were traveling to Germany to compete on the biggest athletic stage. Instead of waiting for customers to visit Herzogenaurach, Adi decided to take a huge personal risk. He packed a sturdy leather suitcase with his finest handcrafted running shoes. These shoes had sharp metal spikes screwed into the sole. Spikes are small metal points fixed to the bottom of athletic footwear to prevent slipping, and give runners maximum grip on the dirt track. Adi got into his car and drove more than 250 miles north to Berlin. When he arrived at the Olympic Village, he did not look for German officials. Instead, he searched for an American sprinter named Jesse Owens. Owens was already famous for his incredible speed, but Adi believed his custom shoes could help the young athlete run even faster. A sprinter is an athlete who runs very short distances at the highest possible speed. Walking into the international training area was unusual and daring for a German shoemaker. However, Adi carried his shoes with quiet confidence. When he met Jesse Owens, he opened his suitcase and placed a pair of lightweight dark leather shoes into the runner's hands. Owens felt the soft calfskin leather and touched the precisely placed metal nails. He agreed to test them during his practice sessions. To Owens, the shoes felt like a natural extension of his own feet. During the Olympic competition, Jesse Owens wore the Dassler spikes in front of more than 100,000 cheering spectators. He sprinted with breathtaking grace and power. Owens went on to win 4 gold medals in the 100 meters, the 200 meters, the long jump, and the 4x100-meter relay. Every international photographer captured images of the world's fastest man racing in Adi Dassler's shoes. Almost overnight, the Dassler name became a global sensation. Coaches and national teams from Europe, North America, and beyond sent letters and telegrams begging for Dassler footwear. Rudi Dassler managed the sudden explosion of business with boundless energy. He negotiated large shipments, organized international deliveries, and promoted their brand across borders. Before the outbreak of World War II, the Dassler factory was producing more than 200,000 pairs of shoes every year. The two brothers had reached the peak of international success. Money, fame, and respect filled their household in Herzogenaurach. Yet, this sudden wave of triumph did not bring the family closer together. Instead, the growing pressure began to expose deep cracks in their relationship. Rudi believed his sales talent was the true reason for their fortune, while Adi believed his shoe designs were the only thing that mattered. As dark political clouds gathered over Europe in 1939, the bond between the two brothers was about to face a test that neither of them could survive. In September 1939, the Second World War broke out across Europe. The quiet life in the small Bavarian town changed almost overnight. The government took control of private factories and demanded military supplies. Adi and Rudi could no longer produce track shoes for world-class athletes. Instead, their machines were ordered to produce heavy boots and weapons parts for the military. This sudden disruption placed tremendous strain on the Dassler family. A disruption is a sudden problem that stops an event or business from continuing normally. Even worse, the two brothers lived together with their families in the same large house near the factory. Adi lived on one floor with his wife Katha. Rudi lived on another floor with his wife Friedel. Katha was strong-willed, smart, and active in factory management. Friedel was proud and deeply protective of her husband. The two women did not get along at all. Daily arguments filled the hallways and the shared kitchen. Small disagreements over household chores, cooking, and company decisions quickly grew into bitter arguments. Rudi and Adi were constantly caught in the middle of these household fights. Instead of working together to solve problems, each brother took his wife's side. The warm family home slowly turned into a place of anger and silence. As the Second World War dragged on, the German army grew desperate for soldiers. In 1943, Rudi received a draft notice. A draft notice is an official letter ordering a citizen to report for military duty. He had to pack his bags, leave his family, and report to an office in Poland, far away from his home and his workshop. Adi, on the other hand, was allowed to stay behind in Herzogenaurach. The local authorities decided that his technical shoemaking skills were essential to keep the factory running. In his cold military barracks, Rudi grew bitter. He convinced himself that Adi and Katha had used their political connections to keep Adi safe at home while sending him into danger. Every letter between the brothers became colder and full of suspicion. The real breaking point came during one of Rudi's brief visits home on leave. One evening, air raid sirens wailed across the town. An air raid is an attack by military airplanes dropping bombs from the sky. Rudi and his wife rushed down into the reinforced shelter beneath the house to hide. Moments later, Adi and Katha hurried down the dark stone stairs to escape the falling bombs. Just as Adi stepped through the doorway, he looked up toward the sky and said out loud, "The dirty bastards are back again." Adi was talking about the Allied bomber planes roaring overhead. But Rudy, sitting in the dark corner, believed his brother was insulting him and his wife. Rudy stood up in pure rage. Adi insisted he only meant the airplanes, but Rudy refused to listen. That single misunderstanding poisoned whatever love remained between them. The factory survived the bombs, but the brotherhood was finished. When the war finally ended in 1945, American troops marched into the quiet streets of Herzogenaurach. The factory was almost torn down to make room for military trucks. But when the officers learned that this humble workshop had made the running shoes for Jesse Owens, everything changed. Instead of destroying the machines, the soldiers placed large orders for sports footwear. Adi went straight to work, turning old army canvas and rubber tires into athletic shoes for the Americans. Yet peace did not heal the Dassler family. Allied forces soon arrested Rudy and sent him to an internment camp. During long interrogations, Rudy learned something that shocked him. Someone from his own hometown had filed a denunciation against him. A denunciation is a formal statement telling authorities that a person is guilty of a crime. Rudy sat in his cell with a deep, burning anger. He became completely convinced that Adi had turned him in to seize control of the company alone. In retaliation, Rudy told the investigators that Adi had also supported the wartime government. The two brothers traded bitter accusations through military officials. The feud had reached a point of no return. By the spring of 1948, working together under one roof was impossible. The brothers agreed to dissolve the Dassler Brothers sports shoe factory. To dissolve a company means to officially end a business and divide everything it owns. They gathered the employees in the courtyard to announce the end of their partnership. The brothers stood far apart and refused to look at each other. Every worker was given a simple choice: stay with Adi or cross the river with Rudy. The company split along the lines of each brother's personality. About 2/3 of the workers, mostly the quiet craftsmen and technical shoemakers, chose to stay on the south side of the Arach River with Adi. The remaining 1/3, mainly the sales staff and office workers who loved Rudy's outgoing energy, packed their tools and followed Rudy to the north side of the river. They divided everything right down the middle: the rolls of leather, the sewing machines, the cutting tools, and the shoe lasts. A shoe last is a solid wooden or metal model shaped like a foot, used by shoemakers to build shoes. The original family business was dead. Two new companies were born on opposite banks of the river, separated by only a few hundred yards. Rudy set up his new workshop in an old storage building across the water. At first, he named his business Ruda, using the first two letters of his first and last name. But the name sounded heavy and dull. In October 1948, he officially renamed it Puma. A puma is a large wild cat known for its incredible speed, power, and agility. Rudy wanted his shoes to give athletes the quickness of a hunting cat. On the other side of the river, Adi created his own brand. On August 18, 1949, he officially registered the company name Adidas, combining his nickname Adi with the first three letters of his last name, Dassler. On that same day, Adi registered a clean trademark: 3 simple parallel stripes stitched onto the side of every shoe. The two brothers had spent 24 years building one successful dream together. Now, they were direct enemies, ready to fight for the feet of the world. The split did not just divide a family, it divided the entire town of Herzogenaurach. The small river turned into a sharp border between two separate worlds. Soon, the town earned a strange nickname: the town of bent necks. When neighbors passed each other on the stone streets, they never looked at each other's faces. They looked straight down at each other's feet. If a person wore shoes with 3 stripes, they belonged to Adolf's side. If they wore shoes with a jumping cat, they belonged to Rudolf's side. The divide touched every part of daily life. An Adidas butcher refused to sell meat to a Puma family. A Puma employee would cross the street just to avoid an Adidas bakery. There were separate barbershops, separate grocery stores, and separate beer halls. Even the town sports were torn apart. The local soccer team ASV Herzogenaurach wore Adidas, while their rivals, 1. FC Herzogenaurach, ran in Puma shoes. People from opposite sides rarely spoke, and young couples from rival factory families were told never to marry. While the town stayed divided, both brothers worked day and night to beat each other on the international stage. In 1952, Adi realized he needed to protect his brand's identity. A Finnish sports brand named Karhu had already been using a three-stripe pattern on their athletic footwear. At the 1952 Olympic Games in Helsinki, Adi approached the Finnish owners directly. He offered to buy the official rights to the design. In exchange, Karhu agreed to transfer the three-stripe symbol for 2 bottles of good whiskey and a modest cash payment of about $1,600. A trademark is a legally registered design that identifies goods from one specific maker. With that deal, Adi secured the 3 stripes as the exclusive symbol of Adidas forever. Meanwhile, a fierce technological race was brewing on the soccer field. In 1952, Rudolf took the lead by launching the Puma Super Atom, the first soccer shoe with screw-in studs. Studs are small pointed pieces of metal or rubber attached to the sole of an athletic shoe to give traction and prevent slipping on wet grass. Rudolf claimed he was the true inventor of interchangeable cleats. However, Adi worked quietly in his workshop to take the technology much further. He created lightweight shoes with adjustable aluminum and plastic studs that could be screwed in or removed quickly depending on field conditions. Adi's big test arrived on July 4, 1954, at the World Cup final in Bern, Switzerland. The West German national team faced Hungary, a legendary squad that had not lost an international match in 4 years. On the day of the match, heavy rain flooded the stadium, turning the grass into a swamp of slick mud. The Hungarian players wore their usual heavy, waterlogged leather boots and slipped constantly. Adi was standing right on the German sideline as the official equipment technician. Looking at the pouring rain, he quickly fitted each German player's boots with his special long screw-in studs. The German players had perfect grip in the deep mud. In a stunning upset that amazed the world, West Germany defeated Hungary 3-2. This historic victory was called the Miracle of Bern. It restored pride to post-war Germany and turned Adidas into a household name across the globe. Across the river in Herzogenaurach, Rudi watched in bitter silence, desperate to strike back. As the years passed, the rivalry grew even bigger. It did not stop with Adi and Rudi. Soon, their sons joined the family war. Adi's son was named Horst, and Rudi's son was named Armin. Both young men worked relentlessly to sign famous athletes to wear their shoes. This kind of business agreement is called a sponsorship. A sponsorship is an arrangement where a company pays an athlete money, and in return, the athlete wears that company's brand in public competitions. By the late 1960s, the cost of signing top athletes was climbing rapidly. Both companies were spending fortunes just to outbid each other. Before the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, the two sides realized they were spending too much money. Horst Dassler from Adidas and Armin Dassler from Puma met in secret. They wanted to prevent a disastrous bidding war over the most famous soccer star on the planet, Pelé of Brazil. The two cousins agreed on a formal peace treaty known as the Pelé Pact. A pact is a serious formal promise made between two sides. In this pact, Adidas and Puma promised that neither company would approach Pelé or offer him a contract. It was meant to protect both family businesses from financial ruin. However, the temptation to win proved too powerful. Armin Dassler could not resist the chance to strike a historic blow against Adidas. Behind his cousin's back, Armin secretly contacted Pelé before the tournament. Puma offered the Brazilian star an enormous contract worth $120,000, along with a royalty of 10 cents for every pair of Puma King shoes sold. $120,000 in 1970 was a staggering fortune. In exchange, Pelé agreed to perform a clever advertising stunt right before the eyes of the world. During the quarterfinal match between Brazil and Peru, millions of fans tuned in to watch the live television broadcast. Just seconds before the opening whistle, Pelé walked up to the referee. He politely asked the referee to pause the match for just a moment so he could tie his shoelaces. The television cameras immediately zoomed in close on Pelé bending down near the center of the field. For several long seconds, the entire world stared directly at his black and white boots, clearly showing the famous leaping cat logo on his feet. It was a masterclass in ambush marketing. Ambush marketing is a clever strategy where a company advertises its product at a major event without paying for official broadcast rights. When Adi and Horst Dassler saw the footage on television, they were furious. The broken promise permanently destroyed any remaining hope of trust between the two families. The bitter war continued with even greater intensity. Yet time was quietly running out for the two original brothers. As the decades went by, Adi and Rudi grew old and tired. They still lived in the same small town of Herzogenaurach. Every morning, they could look out their windows and see each other's factories across the river, but they never spoke a single friendly word to each other again. In 1974, Rudolf Dassler became gravely ill. A local priest tried to bring Adi to his brother's bedside to make peace before it was too late, but the old hatred was too strong. Rudolf died in October 1974 at the age of 76, without ever reconciling with his brother. 4 years later, in 1978, Adolf Dassler also passed away at the age of 77. The tragedy of their lifelong feud followed them all the way to the end. In the town cemetery of Herzogenaurach, both brothers were buried under the same soil, but even in death, they refused to be near one another. Their graves were placed in the two farthest possible corners of the graveyard, separated by maximum distance forever. World War II changed everything. The factory could no longer focus on athletic running shoes. Instead, the government ordered the brothers to produce military supplies and heavy combat boots for soldiers. Adolf and Rudolf disagreed on almost every decision during those tense years. Day after day, simple meetings turned into bitter arguments. The breaking point arrived on a freezing night in 1943. Air raid sirens screamed across the dark valley of Herzogenaurach. Rudolf rushed his family down into a neighborhood bomb shelter. A bomb shelter is a thick underground room built of concrete to protect people from falling bombs. Rudolf and his wife sat together in the dim light, listening to the rumbling sky and waiting for the danger to pass. A few moments later, Adolf and his wife Kathe pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. Adolf was covered in dust and completely out of breath. He looked up at the trembling ceiling and shouted angrily, "The dirty bastards are back again." Adolf was talking about the Allied bombing planes in the night sky. He was cursing the aircraft dropping explosives on the town. Rudolf heard something entirely different. He looked at Adolf and felt certain his younger brother was looking directly at his family and insulting them. Adolf tried to explain his words, but Rudolf refused to listen. That single misunderstanding created a deep wound that never healed. In that small, dusty shelter, the trust between the brothers broke forever. Tensions escalated even further soon after. The army drafted Rudolf for frontline military service. To draft means to legally require a citizen to join the armed forces and go to war. Rudolf packed his bags with deep anger. Back in town, local officials permitted Adolf to remain behind to manage the factory. Rudolf looked at the situation with total suspicion. He believed Adolf had used political connections to send him into danger while keeping the business for himself. When Allied forces later held Rudolf in a prisoner camp, his resentment only hardened. He became convinced his own brother had denounced him to gain total control of the company. The two boys who once shared big dreams in a tiny laundry room could no longer look at each other without bitterness. Even after both founders passed away, the rivalry between the two sports giants continued for decades. Both companies grew into massive global forces that shaped athletic history. Today, Adidas is the second-largest sportswear manufacturer in the world, generating over 21 billion euros each year with nearly 60,000 employees. Puma is the third-largest athletic brand on Earth, producing over 8 billion euros in yearly revenue with more than 21,000 workers worldwide. Two small workshops that began with scrap leather ended up clothing athletes on every stadium, court, and street across the globe. Back in Herzogenaurach, the river had divided neighbors for generations, yet time gradually softened the old feud. On September 21, 2009, on International Peace Day, the leaders of both companies decided that 61 years of family silence was enough. They chose to bury the hatchet. To bury the hatchet is a common English expression that means to end a long conflict and make peace. Employees from Adidas and Puma gathered together on a local field for a friendly soccer match. The chief executives of both brands, Herbert Hainer of Adidas and Jochen Zeitz of Puma, walked onto the grass, smiled, and shared a historic handshake. Workers played on the same pitch, traded jerseys, and shared drinks along the Arak River. Decades of division finally came to a calm and quiet close. The story of the Dassler brothers carries a meaningful lesson about effort and craft. Adolf Dassler succeeded because he worked with patience, placing one careful stitch at a time. Rudolf Dassler succeeded because he had the courage to share his ideas boldly with the world. Learning English works in the exact same way. You do not need to master an entire language in a single afternoon. You only need to place one steady stitch every day. Every new word you practice gives your mind better traction. Traction is the firm grip that keeps you steady and prevents you from slipping as you move forward. With continuous daily practice, you will find your footing and build lasting confidence. This story is shared for historical education and English language listening practice. If you enjoyed this lesson, please subscribe to Learn English Through History, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which brand do you prefer, Adidas or Puma? And what was your favorite new English word from today's story? Keep practicing every day, stay curious, and I will see you in our next history lesson.